I'm here to share my story, a story of love, confusion, mistakes, and ultimately self-discovery. This is not a justification, but an attempt to explain how it all unfolded from my perspective. My name is Heather, and I'm 31 years old. I've always considered myself a loyal person, someone who values honesty and commitment. I grew up in a loving family, with parents who modeled a strong, supportive marriage. For most of my life, I believed in the ideal of finding that one person who would be your partner through thick and thin, who would make you feel complete. And I thought I had found that person in Reynold. Reynold and I met in our mid-20s, both of us young professionals trying to navigate our careers and lives in a busy city. We clicked instantly. He was kind, intelligent, and had a sense of humor that could lighten any mood. We spent hours talking about everything, from our childhoods to our dreams for the future. I felt like I had finally found someone who truly understood me, someone I could build a life with. Our relationship progressed quickly. We moved in together after a year, and soon after, we started talking about marriage. I was happy, genuinely happy. We had our differences, like any couple, but we were committed to each other. We built a life together, shared friends, and even adopted a dog, Daisy, who became our little family. For the first few years, everything was great. We were in love, and we supported each other in our careers and personal growth. But as time went on, things began to change, slowly at first, and then more noticeably. I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it started, but there was a shift in our relationship, a subtle distance that grew with each passing day. They say that the hardest part of a relationship isn't the initial excitement or the inevitable fights, but the everyday routine that sets in after the honeymoon phase ends. That's where Reynold and I found ourselves. We still loved each other, but the passion, the spark that had once defined our relationship, began to fade. Our conversations became more about logistics, who would pick up groceries, whose turn it was to walk Daisy, than about our hopes, dreams, or even how our day had been. We still spent time together, but it felt more like a habit than a choice. We were comfortable, but that comfort began to feel like complacency. The intimacy we once shared, both emotional and physical, dwindled. We were living together, but I started to feel like we were living parallel lives. I tried to ignore it at first, convincing myself that it was just a phase, that all relationships go through ebbs and flows. But the more I tried to push the feelings aside, the more they consumed me. I began to feel lonely, even when Reynold was right there beside me. I missed the connection we used to have, the feeling of being truly seen and understood. And that's when I met Jason. Jason was a colleague, someone I had worked with on a few projects over the years. He was charismatic, confident, and had a way of making everyone around him feel important. At first, our interactions were purely professional, but as we worked more closely together, I found myself drawn to him. He was everything Reynold wasn't, spontaneous, adventurous, and always ready. It started innocently enough, with light banter in the office and the occasional lunch together. But there was an undeniable chemistry between us, something that I hadn't felt in a long time. Jason made me feel alive, in a way that I hadn't felt since the early days of my relationship with Reynold. I knew it was wrong. I knew that what I was feeling, that I was playing with fire. But I couldn't help myself. It felt like I was waking up from a long sleep, and I didn't want to go back to the monotony of my life with Reynold. Jason was exciting, and I found myself craving that excitement more and more. We started texting outside of work, at first just casual conversations about work or things we were interested in. But soon, our messages became more personal, more flirtatious. I knew I was crossing a line, but I kept telling myself it was harmless, that I was just enjoying the attention. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The night it happened, Reynold was out of town for a work trip. Jason and I had been texting all day, and I could feel the tension building between us. He suggested we grab a drink after work, and without really thinking it through, I agreed. I knew what I was doing, but I pushed the guilt aside, convincing myself that it was just a drink, nothing more. We met at a bar downtown, a place far enough from the office that we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. The conversation flowed easily, and I found myself laughing and smiling in a way I hadn't in months. Jason was charming, attentive, and he made me feel desirable, something I hadn't felt in a long time. After a few drinks, the lines between right and wrong became blurred. Jason leaned in closer, and before I knew it, we were kissing. In that moment, all the guilt, all the doubts, disappeared. I was consumed by the thrill of it, the rush of doing something forbidden. It was exhilarating, and I didn't want it to end. We ended up back at his place, and that's when I made the decision that would change everything. We slept together, and in that moment, I felt a mix of emotions: excitement, guilt, pleasure, and shame. I knew I had crossed a line that I could never uncross, and yet, I didn't regret it. Not in that moment. But the next morning, the reality of what I had done hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt sick to my stomach, not just because I had betrayed Reynold, but because I had enjoyed it. I had wanted to feel something, anything, that would break the monotony of my life, and I had found it in Jason. But at what cost? In the days that followed, the guilt became unbearable. I couldn't look at Reynold without feeling a deep sense of shame. I had betrayed the person who had always been there for me, the person who loved me unconditionally. And for what? A fleeting moment of excitement? A temporary escape from the boredom I had allowed to take root in our relationship? I wanted to pretend it never happened, to go back to the way things were before. But I knew that wasn't possible. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Every time Reynold smiled at me, every time he told me he loved me, I felt like a fraud. I was living a lie, and it was eating me alive. I started to pull away from Reynold, distancing myself emotionally and physically. I told myself it was to protect him, that he didn't deserve to be hurt by my mistakes. But in reality, I was trying to protect myself from the overwhelming guilt. I couldn't bear the thought of him finding out, of seeing the look of betrayal in his eyes. But as much as I tried to keep the affair a secret, it began to take a toll on me. I became irritable, withdrawn, and distant. Reynold noticed, of course, and he tried to talk to me about it, but I shut him out. I was too consumed by my own guilt and shame to let him in. After weeks of living with the guilt, I knew I couldn't keep it a secret any longer. It was tearing me apart, and it was only a matter of time before Reynold noticed something was seriously wrong. I couldn't live with the lie anymore, no matter how much I wanted to protect him from the truth. One evening, after dinner, I sat Reynold down and told him everything. I'll never forget the look on his face: shock, disbelief, and then the pain. He didn't say anything for what felt like an eternity. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. He asked me why. Why did I betray him? How could I do something so hurtful? I didn't have a good answer. I told him about how I had been feeling, about the loneliness, the lack of connection, and how I had let those feelings push me into making a terrible mistake. But I knew those were just excuses. The truth was, I had been selfish. I had let my own insecurities and desires drive me to do something that I knew was wrong. Reynold was devastated, and I knew I had broken something that might never be repaired. He told me he needed time to think, to figure out what he wanted to do. I understood. I didn't deserve his forgiveness, and I wasn't sure if I even wanted it. Part of me felt like I deserved to be punished for what I had done. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Reynold and I tried to navigate the new reality of our relationship, but it was clear that things would never be the same. The trust that had once been the foundation of our relationship was shattered, and I didn't know if it could ever be rebuilt. We decided to take a break, to spend some time apart to figure out what we both wanted. It was painful, but it was necessary. I needed to confront the reasons behind my actions, to understand why I had betrayed the person I loved. I started seeing a therapist, someone who could help me unravel the emotions and thoughts that had led me down this path. Through therapy, I began to understand that the affair wasn't just about Jason or the excitement he offered. It was about something deeper: my own fears, insecurities, and the feeling of being stuck in a life that I wasn't fully satisfied with. I had been using the affair as an escape, a way to avoid confronting the issues in my relationship and in myself. But in doing so, I had caused even more pain and damage. I had betrayed not just Reynold, but also myself and the values I thought I held dear. After several months of reflection and therapy, I began to see things more clearly. I realized that my betrayal had been a wake-up call, a painful reminder that I needed to address the underlying issues in my life and my relationship. I couldn't keep running from my problems or looking for quick fixes to fill the void inside me. Reynold and I eventually started talking again, cautiously at first. We both knew that the road to healing would be long and difficult, but we were willing to try. We decided to go to couples therapy, to work through the issues that had led to the betrayal and to see if there was any hope of rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to give up, when I thought it would be easier to walk away and start over. But I loved Reynold, and I was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. We had to rebuild our relationship from the ground up, to relearn how to trust each other and how to communicate openly and honestly. It's been over a year since I betrayed Reynold, and our relationship is still a work in progress. We're not the same couple we were before the affair, but in some ways, that's a good thing. We've both grown, both individually and as a couple, and we've learned a lot about ourselves and each other. But the scars of betrayal don't just disappear. They linger, a reminder of the pain and the mistakes that were made. There are still moments of doubt, still times when the past comes back to haunt us. But we're committed to making our relationship work, and that's what matters. I've learned a lot about myself over the past year. I've learned that betrayal isn't just about the act itself, but about the deeper issues that drive someone to that point. I've learned that healing takes time, patience, and a lot of hard work. And I've learned that forgiveness, both of yourself and of others, is possible, but it's not something that comes easily. So, why did I betray my partner? The answer isn't simple. It's a combination of factors: a lack of communication, feelings of loneliness and disconnection, and my own insecurities and fears. I let those feelings fester, and instead of addressing them, I sought out a temporary escape, something that would make me feel alive again. But in doing so, I hurt the person I loved most, and I nearly destroyed our relationship. Betrayal is never justified, but it can be understood. It's a symptom of deeper issues that need to be addressed if there's any hope of moving forward. I'm not proud of what I did, but I've learned from it. I've learned that relationships require constant work and communication, that you can't take your partner for granted, and that running from your problems only makes them worse. Reynold and I are still together, still working on our relationship. It's not perfect, and it never will be. But we're both committed to each other, to making things work, and to building a future together. That's all we can do: take it one day at a time, and try to be better than we were before.